Hi, this is Kirby Anderson. Each day we take on the tough issues and provide a biblical perspective to them. The topics we cover are wide-ranging: apologetics, theology, prophecy, creation and evolution, intelligent design, marriage, family, child-rearing, the millennial generation, trends in society, politics, economics, business, religious liberty, the Constitution, public policy, foreign policy, military policy, tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View starts right now.
Across America, live. This is Point of View. And now, Kirby Anderson.
Thank you for joining me. The first hour today, we're going to spend some time really talking about what is taking place at the border. Of course, we've talked about it before. We're going to get into it in some detail. Just a few minutes, Gary Bauer will be joining us, and we've actually posted two of his commentaries on that subject. They came from his end-of-day report, and as we get into some of that, we'll go into it in a little bit more detail. Next hour, let me just give you kind of a preview. We're also going to talk about the Millennial Roundtable. We're going to have Jonathan Teague with us. We'll talk about some of the trends that we're seeing in the younger generation, and again, some action items for what you need to be doing in your church and in your family. But let's first of all come to this issue of the border. And we were told the other day by the Secretary of Homeland Security, that would be Alejandro Mayorkas, that the border is closed. That would be a surprise to the now almost 20,000 Haitian refugees down in Del Rio, Texas. It is a place I know something about because a wife of a former staff member actually came from Del Rio. We have been following what is taking place there. But before we get Gary Bauer on, I wanted to answer a question that I'm getting from you, and that is, why all of a sudden all the Haitians? What happened here? How did this happen? Because we're used to seeing people coming from Mexico and Latin America. And if you go to the border, I'm going to give you a little bit of inside baseball here. There are two categories often used for migrants: Mexicans, who then can be easily returned back to the state and the country of Mexico, and then what they call OTMs, which are other than Mexican. And those are individuals that are a little more difficult to return because they're coming from other Central America or South American countries. But there's another category that's not official, but it's real, and that is what are called extracontinental countries, and that would be Haiti, because of course it is an island. Now, the Haitians don't necessarily easily go back to a country they came from because they don't speak Spanish. They speak either Haitian Creole, or in most cases, if they're a little better educated, maybe actually speak French. And so they have never really assimilated in some of the countries they've come from. Now, many of these Haitian migrants, as they are called right now, have come from countries like Brazil and Chile. We know there's a very significant number right now in Colombia that want to head north, others in Peru and a variety of other places. And you might say, well, why are they actually in these, if you will, Central American and South American countries? Well, many of them have been there since the earthquake that took place there in Haiti. And of course, there are terrible conditions there, and many Christian ministries, including individuals we've interviewed on this program, have actually gone to Haiti to try to improve the circumstances there. But these are individuals that have left, and as a result, when they then show up at our borders, they're more difficult to handle because you can't necessarily send them back to Mexico. The original plan under the Trump administration is you had to stay in Mexico and apply for asylum, but they're simply here, and many more are coming, even though they keep saying, Alejandro Mayorkas keeps saying, the border is closed, do not come. They're not really listening. And if you think about it, there's really only one place that you could send Haitian migrants, And that's back to Haiti. Well, in a few minutes, we're going to be talking with our friend Gary Bauer, talking about the fact that even though we've had now the numbers up to about 20,000 people under that international bridge there at Del Rio, only about 300 were flown home, and those are mostly Haitian men. The others either are waiting to be processed, where then they will be released into this country with the idea that someday they're supposed to return for an actual court hearing, or we're finding that given the fact that there's at one time at least 10,000 to 15,000 people, I went and counted it, there are 24 porta potties. You can do the math and figure what is actually going on there. And some of them just so frustrated, they just have actually continued to walk into the American culture. And so that is just one of the things we're going to try to address today with our good friend Gary Bauer. And if that helped answer a question, it brings us back to one of the things we're talking about this week, and that is the desire for us to educate you about many things that are taking place. Our theme this week during Truth Team is Unchanging Truth. And Brad Fisk with me once again. And Brad, when we look at this disaster at the border, I'm a little weary of people in Homeland Security telling us that it's not a crisis. I think we can see that it is.
Boy, I'm telling you, there is so much misinformation, and really, they're lying. Really, they're not telling the truth. And that's what we're about, unchanging truth. You can't change the truth, the real biblical truth. It is what it is. But we invite you to prayerfully consider joining our financial team. We call it Truth Team, and we're excited for those of you this week that have already made that decision, and we're looking forward to adding your name to the Truth Team list.
Let me just mention that some of you sometimes say, what can I do? Well, first of all, you can pray about this crisis. There's going to be a need for us to reach out to all these refugees, and less than 5 miles from where we are right now, a church that I'm associated with has an outreach in what's called Vickery Meadow, and they reach out to all these refugees. They teach English classes, job readiness training, civics classes. They have clubs for kids. They have all sorts of resources and those kinds of things. And when you talk about the Afghan refugees, I was just looking this up. One particular group doing a program called Welcome the Stranger has said that really about 90% of the refugees that come from Afghanistan within 6 months are self-sufficient. I hate to say it, but many of these individuals from Haiti that will end up on our doorstep, they are probably going to need a lot more help. And so this is going to be a great challenge for us in the church. Oftentimes call it pomp and circumstance. The pomp of the, in this case, Biden administration, and the circumstance of all of us Christians through all sorts of groups like Food for the Poor, World Vision, World Impact, and all sorts of other ministries and church ministries to reach out and to minister to those individuals. So we're going to talk more about that with Gary Bauer, but also we want to challenge you today, as we have this week, to consider what you might do to join with us. The website that has some of the information we're going to be talking about today is pointofview.net. You're going to see 2 very good articles by Gary Bauer that goes into this in more detail. I've also posted some other material that you can find there as well. And so go to pointofview.net. But we also, as you know, have individuals waiting by the phone at 800-347-5151. And if you believe that this kind of information is helpful to you, maybe helps you understand what you and your church can do, and most importantly, equips not only you, but other people that will be listening to this program, I want you to consider what you might do to pledge us right now.
Would there be 9 of you that could give a monthly gift? Monthly gifts are so critical to this ministry to keep us fully funded so we can do what we do. So we're asking you to consider a monthly gift of any amount. Of course, you can give singly or whatever amount God leads you, but we're asking you to give us a call with that pledge of support. Don't have to have the money now. Just make the pledge. 800-347-5151. That's 800-347-5151. 5151. You can also go to pointofview.net. As Kirby said a moment ago, pointofview.net.
Looking forward to our conversation with Gary Bauer. Of course, he is an individual that has been our eyes and ears there in Washington, D.C. He has a lot to say. First, we'll talk about the whole issue of immigration and what is happening at the border. Then also, of course, the president gave a speech before the United Nations. He has some comments about that, too, as you might imagine. So we are looking forward to that. But while we go to a break, this is a perfect time to give us a call. 800-347-5151. Of course, you can at any time go to the website, pointofview.net. We need to hear from you right now. We'll be right back.
This is Viewpoints with Kirby Anderson.
We all want the pandemic to end, but hoping that it will end and predicting it will end once everyone is vaccinated is something very different. I hate to be the bearer of bad news, but COVID-19 isn't going away whether all Americans are vaccinated or not. Most scientists believe that this coronavirus will become an endemic virus. That means that it would continue to circulate in the global population for years to come. The journal Nature did a survey of 100 immunologists, infectious disease researchers, and virologists who are working on the coronavirus. They asked if they thought that it would be eradicated or merely become an endemic virus. Nearly 9 in 10 felt that that would likely be the case. More recently, Harvard University School of Public Health attempted to answer the question, what will it be like when COVID-19 becomes endemic? Answering that question depends on a few factors. Have enough people gained immune protection from vaccination and natural infection? What is the strength and duration of immune protection from vaccination and natural infection? Both questions are up for debate. The current administration talks about the millions of adults who are not vaccinated, but ignores that a significant number of those millions may have natural immunity because they are one of the 100 million who had COVID. The duration of immunity is becoming an issue as more scientists and doctors are talking about rolling out a booster shot. If you get a measles shot, you are good for life. A tetanus shot can last you for a decade, but some of the COVID-19 vaccines seem to be losing their ability to prevent a subsequent infection. Predicting the end of the pandemic may be a great political talking point, but it appears that this coronavirus will be with us for a long time. I'm Kirby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
For a free copy of Kirby's booklet, A Biblical View on Critical Race Theory, go to viewpoints.info/CRT. Point of View Truth Team, unchanging truth in a changing world.
Again, don't forget, we are listener-supported. That's why we come to you during our Truth Team, Unchanging Truth. God's unchanging truth in a changing world and culture. Brad Fisk with me, and we've been talking about the crisis at the border. And one of the things I've done is taken the two very good commentaries by Gary Bauer on Monday and Tuesday from his end-of-day report, and those are on our website at pointofview.net, so you can find those there. You go there. You can also go to pointofview.net and make your pledge, and we certainly need to hear from you. So I wanted to spend some time, first of all, talking with Gary Bauer about what is the crisis at the border and how to think that through. Then the president gave a speech yesterday to the United Nations. I know he has a few comments about that as well. I'm looking forward to that. And Gary Bauer is certainly no stranger to this program, individual that was the chief domestic policy advisor to Ronald Reagan, serves as the president of American Values. And Gary Bauer, once again, welcome back to Point of View.
Well, thank you, Kirby. Always great to be with you. You're a oasis in the middle of what an increasingly is a public policy desert under our current leadership. So I'm always glad to have the chance to talk with you and your listeners.
Well, the Secretary of Homeland Security assures us that the border is closed, but somehow those individuals, now up to almost 20,000 Haitian migrants, didn't get the memo and have shown up. And we have posted a couple of pieces, one of which in which you were arguing that President Biden was completely surprised that the Haitians showed up. And just before you came on, I tried to explain why the Haitians came in the first place, because they sort of felt like there was an open door. What have you learned?
Well, that's exactly right. I mean, in many ways, everybody is acting rationally, if not right, but acting rationally, except for our own government. The Haitians are certainly acting rationally. They've heard that Biden has given some sort of green light that Haitians that make it into the United States will not be expelled because of some of the difficulties they're having in Haiti, and they also know that we not only have open borders, but increasingly we have a welfare state. So why wouldn't unskilled folks having a hard time making it in life walk into the north, into the United States, get free health care, free education, and have very little chance of being thrown back out of the country? I hate to say this, Kirby, even the drug cartels and the human traffickers and the drug dealers operating along the border, they're evil people, but they're acting rationally. They see a lack of federal law enforcement, and they take advantage of it. It's harder to come up with a rational explanation for what Biden and Harris and the left wing is doing in this country with the cooperation of our lamestream media. And in fact, the only explanations I can come up with that are rational get to some pretty dark things that they see in this, a way to speed up what they want to be a transformation of the United States into something that we don't recognize.
Well, as people go to our website, or they, of course, go to American Values, either way, they'll see one of your articles on the border crisis, and you ask a rational question that comes to an irrational conclusion, and that is we spend $700 billion a year on national defense, and we actually are helping other countries like Japan, South Korea, Taiwan, saying we'll defend their borders. The other day, I heard that we were actually going to help Tajikistan, which has a southern border with Afghanistan. So we're helping them deal with their southern border, but we're not dealing with ours. And the numbers are beyond imagination. 200,000 illegal aliens. I used this as an example the other day. We broadcast, for example, in Birmingham. Well, that's about the population of the entire city of Birmingham, or it's a little less than the population of Stockton, California, where we broadcast, or a variety of others. And I started using examples, and that's every month, basically, the population of some of the places that hear this broadcast.
Well, that's right. And look, some others have said this, but it's certainly true. Every state, every community, every city is becoming a border state, a border city. I think we're all tempted. Just Americans are busy. We've all got a lot of challenges still dealing with COVID. People are worried about mortgages and all the rest of it. And they look at these articles and these broadcasts that report what's happening, and they're upset about it. But I think there's a temptation to say, well, I'm glad I don't live there. At least I don't have to worry about all the implications of all these unvetted people pouring into our country. What I think we have to keep reminding people about is that every night, those folks, many of them, thousands of them, are being flown out of the border area in Texas, bussed out of the area into communities all over America. In many cases, the Biden administration doesn't even tell your local mayor or the governor of your state that they're bringing in additionally hundreds and thousands of people from third world countries who I don't want to sound hard-hearted, but it's hard to see what they bring to the United States that is actually helpful for the United States. Shouldn't we have an immigration system that matches up the needs of our country with the needs of immigrants that want to come here? We shouldn't just become a dumping ground for every authoritarian government or failed government that sort of lessens the pressure on themselves by sending their disgruntled population to the United States. It's just an ongoing disaster, and I hope we can come up with a way to stop it, because 4 years of this has only been 8 months, 4 years of this, and we will be in a disaster, an emergency that I think is hard for anybody to fully get their arms around.
I love your question. What do they bring? Well, they bring one thing, COVID-19, because that's your second article here about the fact that none of these individuals are vaccinated. And so it's just another illustration of the really bizarre policy we have right now. But Gary, we're coming to a break. And one of the things we always love to do is, first of all, encourage people to support you. I've always encouraged people to do so. And we've even posted some excerpts from the end of day report, which I think is a must read. And I do encourage people to support American values, but there is also an opportunity for some of our listeners right now to support Point of View. What would you say to them?
Well, Kirby, look, this is really important. I like to feel like I'm doing some important work in Washington. Look, there are other conservative organizations here in Washington that know how legislation works and all the rest of that. So if I retire, which I don't plan on doing, there would be plenty to fight the battle. But, quite frankly, in the world of the media, TV, radio, et cetera, there aren't many voices. And you and Point of View have been this consistent voice for family, for faith, for freedom, for defending the United States and defending religious liberty. I really want your listeners to step up now, tell their neighbors about you if they haven't already. But you really need to prosper if we're going to win this battle for the future of America.
One of the things, Brad, we've talked about is that you don't hear some of the kinds of things we're talking about right now. Talked about even why are we seeing so many Haitians showing up? I tried to explain that. Gary's talking about what's going on here. This kind of information, you're just not going to probably pick up if you turn on MSNBC or CNN tomorrow.
And the question is, would you like to continue to receive this information? Well, it costs money. We are listener-supported radio, and we invite you, as Gary has so well, to join the Truth Team. 800-347-5151. 800-347-5151. 5151. You can also give online at pointofview.net. That's pointofview.net. There is an urgency here. I'm sensing that. And so there's an urgency for your giving as well. We need to hear from you because we must stay strong in the days and weeks and months ahead, as Gary is pointing out. So give us a call, 800-347-5151. When
we come back with Gary, we want to talk a little bit about some of the people that are standing up, one of which is the Senate parliamentarian, and we'll talk about that in just a minute, trying to actually push amnesty into an infrastructure bill. And you say, who's standing up for me? Well, you're going to hear the name of an individual probably you've never heard of before that's standing up, but also the president actually spoke at the United Nations, and I can't wait to hear some of Gary's comments. I know I'll have a few, which I'll do even after he leaves, so we'll get to that. So you don't want to miss that, but when we go to a break, this is a perfect time to make that phone call. We have some people right now actually standing by the phones, and we're looking for 5 phone calls right now. You can, of course, anytime go to the website pointofview.net, and you can be doing that even while you're listening to the interview we're going to do with Gary in a few minutes. But if you would want to make that call, because I know some of you find that the easiest way to go, that number is 800-347-5151, 800-347-5151. Can we get 5 phone calls from you right now? And again, the website is pointofview.net. That's a place where you can click on that banner that says Unchanging Truth, but it's also a place where you can find the 2 articles by Gary Bauer. So it's all right there. Pointofview.net or 1-800-347-5151.
If you want to achieve more stability in your life, here's a tip. You can't. We learned that the hard way the last 18 months. Stability is something we try to build for ourselves through our jobs, our routines, our relationships, even our health. But no matter how stable we think our lives are, all of it can change in a moment. No wonder Americans' anxiety is through the roof. Many have lost the only sense of stability they ever had. In the midst of all the recent change and disruption, Isaiah 40 verse 8 offers a refreshing reminder. The grass withers, the flower fades, but the word of our God will stand forever. That's why Point of View will always point you to God's unchanging word no matter what goes on in the world. When you join our Truth Team today, you will aid that mission and help more Americans be spiritually prepared for whatever changes come next. To begin making this ongoing impact, visit pointofview.net or call 1-800-347-5151. That's pointofview.net and 800-347-5151. Point of View will continue after this.
You are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again, is Kirby Anderson.
Back once again, going to continue our conversation in just a minute with Gary Bauer, but also in studio with me today, Brad Fisk, as this is part of our Truth Team Week, Unchanging Truth in a Changing World and Culture. And Brad, we mentioned just as we went to the break that people can go to the website, pointofview.net. They can, of course, find 2 articles by Gary Bauer, and that's a good link then to go to his website, or of course they can click on his picture and get that. But as they click on that button that says join now, it occurred to me that some of them may say, well, are there any benefits in terms of joining, say, at the $50 a month level, and they can see the Outlook magazine, the booklets, the bags, and a number of other things. So that's a good place to go to find out more.
It is, and we're encouraging you. That's kind of the sweet spot of giving us $50 a month, and it's really doable for a lot of people. Just take a look at your budget, because it helps our budget to know that. So again, the magazine, the booklet, and then these really cool, a messenger bag that's made out of canvas. It's really cool, or a leather laptop bag. Those are free gifts. So go over to pointofview.net and make your gift. Be as generous as you can. And we're just so appreciative of those of you that have done that, and look forward to welcoming a lot of new members onto the Truth Team. 800-347-5151 or pointofview.net.
Let me just mention that it always amazes me the way Washington, D.C. decides to solve problems. Yesterday, when we talked about economics, we have a $28 trillion budget deficit, and we are spending twice as much as we have money coming in. Wow. So what's the solution? Well, the House of Representatives decided to raise the debt ceiling. Well, here's another example. We have a crisis at the border, and Gary Bauer, the argument was made that I know what we need to do. We need to add this idea of an amnesty provision in the infrastructure bill. But I thank you for the fact that on Monday you reminded us that that did not happen because of the courage of the Senate parliamentarian. And I doubt one person out of 100, even in Washington, D.C., could tell you her name, but because she was willing to stand up, maybe we won't have this terrible piece of legislation allowing all these individuals to become future citizens.
Well, that's a good summary, Kirby. Her name is Elizabeth, and I think the last name is pronounced McDonough. She's, I believe, 55 years old, a graduate of George Washington University Law School, and she never makes the news. She's in a job that's way, way, way behind the scenes, but she has to make these parliamentarian rulings on various procedures in the United States Senate. And on this particular issue, the Democrats are trying to pass this huge spending bill through a process called reconciliation. That means they only need 51 votes to pass it. You can't stop a bill that affects the budget and has all this spending in it by filibustering the bill. So as you said, they tried to sneak in there basically an amnesty for 8 million people that eventually would bring 8 million new voters onto the rolls eventually. Guess who they assumed they would be voting for? And this principled woman said, wait a minute, you aren't allowed under the rules of the Senate to put a huge policy change into a reconciliation bill just because the policy change might have a few budget implications. So she called them out on this. Senator Schumer was outraged, ran to a microphone right away. I can only imagine what pressure she is still under to change her mind. But as of now, she's made the ruling, and this is a major problem for the Biden, Harris, Schumer, Pelosi plan to transform America.
You know, one of the things that we do at Point of View, and maybe one more justification why we would hope people would consider supporting this ministry, is that we have Take Action. The Take Action item that we had a couple of weeks ago, or actually almost 2 months ago, was H.R. 1. The most recent one is H.R. 4. A lot of these would completely destroy elections as we know it. But here's a good example, because as we're getting closer to some of these votes, we want to put some of that information out. And Gary, you've over the years, and we've known each other for decades, let's be honest, you've seen the impact that sometimes doing these Take Action items, either in your end-of-day report or in our Point of View broadcast, has made in terms of the future of legislation in America.
Well, Kirby, I'm glad you brought that up. You know, the average guy out there, he's not going to drop everything and come to Washington, D.C. and pound on the door of his elected official. It's very rare that somebody comes here to lobby on an issue. And quite frankly, governance has become so complicated, and the big government crowd has figured out how to hide things in these sometimes 6, 7, 8, 10,000 page pieces of legislation, and we don't find out until later how badly our families have been hurt, or our religious liberty, or our pocketbooks. So when I've been on your show over the years, and you have put out the alert that there's something pending in the United States Congress that will hurt American families and take away or threaten our basic rights, I almost immediately get phone calls from members of Congress in the districts where your show is playing, saying, "Gary, what's going on? I'm getting a bunch of phone calls quoting you on this thing, point of view." So folks, it works. This is a way for you to leverage your influence along with countless other Americans to beat back the big government crowd in Washington and the leftists that have declared war on our most deeply held values. So, I can scream at my wife in the morning about how badly things are going, or come in here in a bad mood with my staff, but unless I can get the word out to the people around America that care and love this country and would do anything to save it, I'm not going to be able to accomplish anything in this city. And I get the word out, Kirby, through you and a few other places that have the same values and will deliver the same message. And it's amazing what we're able to accomplish just by getting that truth out.
After we let you go, we'll talk a little bit more about some of the speech that the president gave at the United Nations, but one that certainly applies to you is that he announced that he wants to rejoin the UN Human Rights Council. Now, anybody that knows Gary Bauer knows that you have been really looking at human rights and religious rights, and the reason we left the Human Rights Council is we didn't think it made a whole lot of sense to be in there with human rights abusers like, China, Russia, Cuba, Venezuela. And so many of the things that were done, I think, for very good principle reasons by the previous administration are now being undone by this president.
Oh, he's relentless about it, Kirby, except when it's in his own interest to blame something on the previous administration. He will do what he's doing on this issue. We subsidize the Human Rights Council. As you said, somebody at the UN got really confused. They must have thought the Human Rights Council was a council for human rights abusers, because that's who they put on this commission. And of course, it undercuts the whole concept of human rights. And you've got people like North Korea or Cuba, China, Communist China, Russia, Iran, sitting in judgment of whether other nations are violating human rights. It would be a Saturday Night Live skit if it wasn't so serious. But it was one of the things he announced in that speech. It was a terrible speech. There's a lot of problems with it, including the president's announcement that he doesn't want to be in a Cold War with anybody. Well, I've got news for him. Communist China has been for decades in a Cold War with us.
I think so. Only got about a minute left. Any final comments to our listeners? Because I want to encourage people to not only support you, but join with us during our Truth Team.
Well, Curry, one of these times I would love to get a phone call from you that says, Gary, we were going to have you on this week. We still will, but we don't have to have you on during our fundraising week because so many people stepped up. We have funded our budget, and now we can just spend all of our time on educating our listeners. But I know that's unrealistic. There's always new challenges. Folks, I really hope that you won't make Kirby ask again. I know I ask you a lot to fund my work, and I would ask you this month, instead of sending your normal check to me at American Values, send it to Kirby Anderson at Point of View, because doing that will help me more than anything else that you can do.
Always appreciate the goodwill that you provide between the two of us, the great information, and most importantly, thank you for giving us some time today here on Point of View.
Great to be with you as always, Kirby, and you too, Brad.
Thank you.
And Brad, again, Gary Bauer's not looking for things to do. So, he actually illustrates, again, the willingness to give us some time just to encourage our listeners to support the ministry.
And we encourage you to do that at pointofview.net, pointofview.net. You can see what thank you gifts we have at the different giving levels, but give like there is no tomorrow. We're asking you to do that. 800-347-5151. 800-347-5151. I want to hear from 9 of you right now.
Point of View Truth Team, unchanging truth in a changing world.
It would be tragic if Point of View did not exist, because not many programs are targeting areas where we need to learn how to think, where we need to learn how to respond, where we need to learn what our options are for active involvement, even how we can share truth with other people. And because Point of View is relevant, dealing with relevant topics, with real people, presenting real answers, it's right where people are, and it's meeting a very real need. This is a wonderful opportunity you have to literally help the ministry be the most effective that it can be through your gifts, through your financial support. I highly recommend it.
June Hunt talking about how tragic it would be if Point of View was not here. Correlates very well with some of the things we just heard Gary Bauer say a minute ago. Let me real quickly just talk about the fact that yesterday the president did give a speech at the UN General Assembly, and it was a head scratcher for a lot of people. First of all, I stand here for the first time in 20 years we're not at war, and really just talked about how wonderful the withdrawal was. And a lot of people are saying, I'm not sure that really fits very well. As a matter of fact, Rona McDaniel's been with us before, said, seems like the president's living in alternative reality. One of the other individuals, Buzz Patterson, who's been on the program with us before, he wrote the book, Dereliction of Duties, actually running for Congress, but actually was the man that carried the nuclear football, said this was an embarrassing speech. And then, again, as if we didn't have enough crises, like a crisis at the border and crisis of mental health and a drug crisis and a number of others, talked about the crisis in the climate. And, of course, I did a commentary about that. So there were a lot of things that did not make sense to a number of people. And as Gary Bauer points out, when you have a human rights council that actually welcomes human rights abuses, I thought it was really striking to see the former UN Ambassador Nikki Haley saying, Joe Biden just announced he wants to rejoin the UN Human Rights Council. We left the council because we should never lend America's credibility to a sham made-up of the worst human right abusers like those from China, Russia, Cuba, and Venezuela. So lots of comments that came out about the speech. But again, we'll go into that in a little more detail. But some of that material you can find at our website. But as we go to this particular segment, Brad, first of all, I think we have an opportunity to hear from some other people.
We do indeed. But first, let me give you the phone number and website. If you'd like to give a gift to Point of View, it's pointofview.net, pointofview.net, and 800-347-5151. Special guest in the studio, the president of Point of View, Warren Kelly. Warren, welcome.
Thank you. Nice to be with you. I don't get to be in the studio very often, but it's always nice when I'm here.
You have been out there looking at how the phones are ringing and maybe even answering some of those phone calls, but we're kind of behind, aren't we?
We are behind where we had projected we would be at this point by a fair amount, and so we really do need to hear from you. If you have been listening and wondering if your support is needed, let me tell you that your support really is needed. We do need to hear from you.
What happens when people do give? I think you are, again, behind the scenes, but you have the best understanding of what happens when a person does give to Point of View.
I think most of our listeners have heard us tell stories or have heard other people tell their stories about how Point of View has impacted their life. So let me say that when you give to Point of View, you're changing lives. And those lives are going on to change the nation. So if you are concerned about where we're at in the country and that it's not headed the right direction, that you're concerned that our values are not being represented, the best way to change that, or what you can do about it, is invest in Point of View and change those lives. Teach people to use the power of God's word applied to their lives to be able to change our culture.
And I was just thinking, Brad, sometimes people want to say, well, what would happen if you didn't support Point of View, if Point of View wasn't on the air?
Yeah, and that would be a really bad thing. I'll just say that because we've been doing this for 49 years. So we've had a little practice at getting it right. And we've had enough feedback, like you said, to know that we are making a difference in people's lives. And there's an urgency here because if you look at all the crises, some of those are going to rear their ugly head, and it could be real trouble in our culture. So we're asking you not to give later, potentially, but to give right now, if you could, at 800-347-5151, 800-347-5151.
Point of View Truth Team.
You know, I can't go to Washington. I can't do those things, so the only way that I can help is the way that God has provided for me, and to give some of that back to you guys. So, like you said, partnering with Point of View, because, you know, you can't do it alone. Thank you very much for what you guys do. Believe me, it's a needed thing, and I just hope everybody certainly would get on the bandwagon with you.
I can't afford not to support you. Point of View gives me a voice, and I just appreciate you. And I've been here listening for years, so I thank you, and I do. Again, I said I can't afford not to support you because I want you to keep going.
I'm 25 years old, and I started listening to Point of View about 4 years ago, and it has changed the way that I think and the way that I view the world around me.
My husband and I are your supporters. We just Really appreciate the show and the people you bring on.
Point of View Truth Team.
Back once again, let me just mention next hour we'll have Dr. Jonathan Teague in studio with us. That's on a Millennial Roundtable. And that's something, Warren Kelly, that we have been really focusing some of our time and attention on, the need to bring biblical truth to the next generation. In some respects, people saying, well, I benefit a great deal from listening to Point of View, but I want people to also think about paying it forward, because the next generation, as we'll talk about with him, doesn't always necessarily embrace biblical truth like the previous generation.
Yeah, we've said many times that the millennial generation is the most unchurched, unchristian generation in the history of our country. That was true until the iGen generation came along, and they're even worse. And so Point of View is doing many things like our Millennial Roundtable to reach out to that new generation and to bring back biblical values. There is a strong remnant in that generation, both of those generations, that are looking for the resources that they need to be able to share their faith with their friends in a way that will help them change their lives. And we're working to help do that, but we need your help to make that happen.
And Brad, that's one of the reasons we come to individuals listening to the broadcast twice a year, just to begin to talk about the fact that if we receive monthly support, I know that Warren has to pay monthly bills, and that matches up pretty well. So that's what we're really looking for.
Yes.
Although if individuals can give a one-time gift, great. But monthly support, you've been talking about this sweet spot of, what, $50 a month?
$50 a month is where a lot of the average giving seems to be taking place. And that makes a huge difference. It really makes a difference for eternity by giving now to Point of View.
And so, again, one of the things, Warren, that we're encouraging people to do is to step up and join with us. And you, over the years, have seen just the number of individuals that have been faithful in the past. But if we are to continue in the future, we just need to maybe find some other individuals been listening to this broadcast to step up and join with us as well.
Point of View has helped shape the biblical worldview of literally tens, maybe even hundreds of millions of Americans over the years. And you have the opportunity to help keep that going, to continue to shape the worldview of our people here in the nation and return us to the values that our nation was built upon and what made us great.
We are coming to a break, so this is a perfect time for you. If you've been waiting until now, you said, I didn't want to miss anything Gary Bauer had to say.
Right.
Don't want to miss some of the things Jonathan Teague is going to say. So let's, if we can, encourage you, especially now. You can go to the website, which is pointofview.net. Of course, that's available 24/7, but if you would like to do that, it is very easy. That's where you can also see some of the thank you gifts that we send to you.
Yes.
But also, if you would want to call right now, this would be perfect because we have people standing by. 800-347-5151, 800-347-5151. Looking for 7 phone calls during this particular extended break, and so let's encourage you to do so.
That phone number, 800-347-5151, 800-347-5151.
We'll talk about the millennial generation and others right after this.
If you want to achieve more stability in your life, here's a tip. You can't. We learned that the hard way the last 18 months. Stability is something we try to build for ourselves through our jobs, our routines, our relationships, even our health. But no matter how stable we think our lives are, all of it can change in a moment. No wonder Americans' anxiety is through the roof. Many have lost the only sense of stability they ever had. In the midst of all the recent change and disruption, Isaiah 40 verse 8 offers a refreshing reminder. The grass withers, the flower fades, but the word of our God will stand forever. That's why Point of View will always point you to God's unchanging word no matter what goes on in the world. When you join our truth team today, you will aid that mission and help more Americans be spiritually prepared for whatever changes come next. To begin making this ongoing impact, visit pointofview.net or call 1-800-347-5151. That's pointofview.net and 800-347-5151. Point of View will continue after this.
I just want to thank you so much for all the wonderful programming you have. You're just absolutely fantastic.
I recently started listening to Point of View, and I really found it interesting because
of the different subjects you cover. Thank you for that.
I really appreciate everything that you do in keeping us informed.
Thank you, Kirby, for everything that you have been doing. I appreciate all the work that you're doing, advocating for the Word of God. Thank you so much.
Point of view, I think, is absolutely necessary because it's a Christian perspective, a biblical worldview perspective, and receive very current, up-to-date information about what is really going on, week to week in our culture, which is changing so rapidly, and yet it's morally sliding backwards.
Yeah, I'm just, first of all, I thank you guys. Y'all's program is wonderful, and enjoy it every day. I learn so much every time I listen to it.
Point of View Radio Talk Show.
Hi, this is Kirby Anderson. Each day we take on the tough issues and provide a biblical perspective to them. The topics we cover are wide-ranging: apologetics, theology, prophecy, creation and evolution, intelligent design, marriage, family, child-rearing, the millennial generation, trends in society, politics, economics, business, religious liberty, the Constitution, public policy, foreign policy, military policy, tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View continues right now.
Across America, live. This is Point of View. And now, Kirby Anderson.
Back once again, let me say thank you for those of you that just called in, but if you have not, wanted to encourage you to do so. But this theme this hour is going to be very much on really the idea of passing the spiritual baton on from one generation to the next. And so for a few minutes, let me just try to give you an understanding and maybe an overview of what is happening to the two key generations, the emerging generation. The first would be what you call the millennial generation. That would be people born between 1980, and most people cut it off at about 1996, but about that. And then you have the next generation, sometimes called Generation Z, or the iGen generation, from 1996 onward. So there are two groups of individuals, and you know that we have done a millennial roundtable here, and in just a few minutes, Jonathan Teague will be with us. He, of course, works as the minister to married adults at Prestonwood Baptist Church, but also has really developed a great expertise about the millennial generation and joins Chelsea and others. So we're going to talk about that. But, 10 years ago, even the organization I've been associated with, Pro Ministries, we wanted to try to understand what was happening in the so-called millennial generation. So we, working with the Barna Research Group, spent an inordinate amount of money and did the largest survey ever done of born-again millennials. Those are individuals that had a born-again experience, that believe they were saved by grace. And yet then when we started asking subsequent questions about a biblical worldview, they broke down almost exactly into one-third, one-third, one-third. You had one-third that had a biblical worldview and attended church on a fairly regular basis. You had one-third that did not have a biblical worldview, but it still attended church. And then you had one-third that did not have a biblical worldview and did not attend church. And it illustrates something we've noticed before, that you, as you are in a church or teaching a Sunday school class or whatever, you find yourself sometimes having some people that really are pretty orthodox, understand the Christian life, and are living it out. And you have others that aren't really as motivated on one or two more important issues. They kind of stray a little bit. And there's sometimes the difference between those who see Christianity as sort of a hobby and those who see Christianity as a lifestyle. So we're tracking that and even putting together great programs that we've talked about on Point of View for years about that. Well, that was back in 2010. It seemed to me that it was time to do another survey. So again, we spent a lot of money. This one, though, in 2020, that was done by Probe Ministries, actually looked at thousands and thousands of people, because we wanted to understand not only what was happening inside the church, what was happening outside the church. One of the most arresting statistics was the fact that the so-called unaffiliated, those are people that when asked, what is your religious preference, they'll say atheist, agnostic, or no preference. Some people call them the nuns, but people sometimes get confused because if you don't see it in print, you don't know what I'm talking about, N-O-N-E-S. So these unaffiliated almost have tripled in time. And so just as you may have heard just a few minutes ago, Warren Kelly talking about how in some respects the millennial generation was sort of unchurched and unchristian, that's even more true of Generation Z, the so-called digital natives. They have never lived in a world where there weren't digital devices like iPhones and iPads and things of that nature. So we began to look at some of those issues, and then we can break them down. because we have done so many surveys of so many individuals. We can break them down by religious affiliation. We can break them down by geographical. And what you might have expected is those people that are born again Protestants are more likely to have a biblical worldview than those that are just in some Protestant domination, and maybe more so than people in other religions, or obviously the unaffiliated. But even there, we began to see some really striking things, which is why we now today spend a fair amount of time talking about evangelism and apologetics here on Point of View, because we found that nearly 2/3 of those individuals, sometimes it didn't matter whether they were Christians or non-Christians, agreed with the statement that you can actually be saved and go to heaven believing in Jesus, Muhammad, Buddha, or a variety of other individuals. Now, you can go back and say, okay, when 60% of even people that claim to be born again in Generation Y or Generation Z do not understand that when Jesus was asked about this, he says in John 14:6, I am the way and the truth and the life. No one comes to the Father but through me. You can see that we have some work to do. And so that's one of the things we're going to talk about today with Jonathan Teague. And again, there are some very good action points, not the least of which is if you're a pastor right now or a Sunday school teacher or a small group leader, you can't assume that everybody that you're teaching has the same orthodox view that you do. And there's probably going to be a need for you to maybe do a series on evangelism, a series on the essential gospel. And so we're going to be talking about that in just a few minutes. And that's one of the reasons we bring this particular opportunity for you this week, because we recognize that God's unchanging truth is true, but we're living in a changing culture where more and more, by percentage of individuals, no longer believe in God's truth. And so we need to challenge Christians to think biblically, and we need to challenge non-Christians with the gospel of Jesus Christ.
Wow, that is an incredible amount of information that is so important today, especially. Why? Because there's nothing more important than your salvation. That is the bottom line here at Point of View every single day, is the gospel of Jesus Christ must go forward, be given its due publicity and its tenets and all the details that go with it. And it's Truth Team Week. We are coming to you. We do this twice a year and come and say, could you give us a hand financially so we can keep doing what we're doing and do it better and do it bigger? But we can't unless you help us financially. And the way you do that is 800-347-5151, 800-347-5151, or pointofview.net.
Point of View Truth Team.
But I feel it's so important that we know what's going on, and you folks do a great job of it. And I also have joined, it's the best thing to do. Like somebody said, they do $1 a day, and they don't feel that so much. At the end of the month, they've got $30 to send right off. And it's up to us citizens to pay attention and do what we can, and to pray and to help you out as much as we can.
Thank you so much for everything that everyone in that room does, and that we need this show like you wouldn't believe.
My husband and I are your supporters. We just really appreciate the show and the people you bring on.
Yes, thank you for, first of all, what you do. And I just wanted to say that your program is giving us a voice, and I want to thank you for that.
So I've been listening to y'all for years. I'm not a politico whatsoever. I believe in voting, yes. But if it weren't for y'all, I wouldn't know how to vote. I'm serious. I wouldn't know the first thing about voting, but I do now.
Point of View, Truth Team 360.
Back once again, and if you would like to join with us, and I hope you would, we have a couple options. One is to go to the website, pointofview.net. That's a place where you can see the various giving totals and some of the gifts that we like to send to you as a thank you for your support. And, of course, we have had a couple of phone calls, but we certainly are waiting for your phone call right now at 800-347-5151, 800-347-5151.
Again, that number, 800-347-5151. You can also go to the website at pointofview.net, pointofview.net.
We'll continue our conversation with Dr. Jonathan Teague right after this.
This is Viewpoints with Kirby Anderson.
We all want the pandemic to end, but hoping that it will end and predicting it will end once everyone is vaccinated is something very different. I hate to be the bearer of bad news, but COVID-19 isn't going away whether all Americans are vaccinated or not. Most scientists believe that this coronavirus will become an endemic virus. That means that it would continue to circulate in the global population for years to come. The journal Nature did a survey of 100 immunologists, infectious disease researchers, and virologists who are working on the coronavirus. They asked if they thought that it would be eradicated or merely become an endemic virus. Nearly 9 in 10 felt that that would likely be the case. More recently, Harvard University School of Public Health attempted to answer the question, what will it be like when COVID-19 becomes endemic? Answering that question depends on a few factors. Have enough people gained immune protection from vaccination and natural infection? What is the strength and duration of immune protection from vaccination and natural infection? Both questions are up for debate. The current administration talks about the millions of adults who are not vaccinated, but ignores that a significant number of those millions may have natural immunity because they are one of the 100 million who had COVID. The duration of immunity is becoming an issue as more scientists and doctors are talking about rolling out a booster shot. If you get a measles shot, you are good for life. A tetanus shot can last you for a decade, but some of the COVID-19 vaccines seem to be losing their ability to prevent a subsequent infection. Predicting the end of the pandemic may be a great political talking point, but it appears that this coronavirus will be with us for a long time. I'm Kirby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
For a free copy of Kirby's booklet, A Biblical View on Critical Race Theory, go to viewpoints.info/CRT. Point of View Truth Team, unchanging truth in a changing world.
Again, we are listener supported, so we encourage you to join with us, and we'll talk more about that in just a minute. But we are privileged to have in studio with us today. Of course, Brad Fisk has been with us, but Dr. Jonathan Teague, an individual that works as minister to married adults at Prestonwood Baptist Church, has his master's degree from Southwestern Baptist Seminary, as well as his doctorate from Southern Baptist Theological Seminary. And I almost feel like I don't have to introduce you because people have seen you in that chair many times, but mostly when Chelsea's been doing an interview with you.
Yes, sir.
And that's part of the Millennial Roundtable. You've certainly enjoyed that. Talk about your experience so far as you have actually begun to look at some of these very issues from a millennial point of view.
Well, you bet, Kirby. And always a privilege to join you and be a part of the conversation today. And that's certainly the case always when we do the Roundtable, because you know, the auspices there are designed to help millennials sort of look at millennials and then talk about millennials. So it's a very millennial thing to do. We're a narcissistic bunch, and that's our struggle. But I do think that the ability to take the biblical worldview and then insert it into the cultural dialogue, which is a chaotic and noisy place, and be able to give the clarity and the consistency that the scripture and a biblical worldview provides us, I think, you know, for me and others that are always privileged to be a part of that conversation, that's such an important thing to do, to be able to offer to our generation a biblical voice and a biblical view of how the world works, what's God's design, what's his plan for young people who I think can be a still monumentally powerful force for the kingdom of God in their day. So it's a great conversation to have.
One of the things that certainly surfaced, and I mentioned it just a few minutes ago, is that if you think of the millennial generation, those born between 1980 and about 1996, the next generation, Generation Z, or the iGen generation, it's been a digital generation, and in some respects, even less churched, less Christian. So there are other challenges that we're facing as we look at these two generations together. Fair?
Well, no, that's incredibly fair. And of course, I like to say you referenced my writing doctoral work was on millennials in particular.
Yes, it was.
How to keep them engaged in the local church, and in particular, leveraging the generations of the church as a tool to do that. And there's a lot of ways we can creatively do that. But the same is true for my kids, are all Gen Z kids. So basically, the rubric is something like this: if you were alive when Ronald Reagan or Bill Clinton was president, you're a millennial.
Yes,
that's a way to think of it. Past that, though, think about this. For instance, the 20th anniversary of 9/11 that we just commemorated. Of course, the various economic things we've seen, the war on terror, but now, of course, our Gen Z kids are experiencing the COVID world. So they've been inserted into the evolving digital world, which millennials were adopters to that world. But Gen Z kids are indigenous to that world, and then now mixed with the COVID experience, I think we're going to see fascinating research. I saw George Barner was on with you earlier this week. I think fascinating research is coming on the tendencies and struggles of that generation. But what we do know is that young people are the future of the church. They're the future of the Christian faith. And so thinking about them, learning about them, and listening to them so we can lead them and lead them spiritually is going to be front burner for us for many years to come, for sure.
Well, let's see if we can use some of your research that you just mentioned a minute ago. Sure. And that is, we would like to talk also to not only millennials this hour, but the grandparents, the parents and grandparents. Yeah. And matter of fact, in just a minute, I'm going to let Brad tell you how many grandchildren he has. But we'll hold that for a second.
I'll figure it out.
But to actually focus on the fact that there are a fair number of grandparents listening right now saying, I passed the spiritual baton on to my kids, but some of them are not passing it on to their kids. Sure. And there's an opportunity to maybe do a little bit of a passing the baton from the grandparents to the kids. And you have actually written about that and done research on that, haven't you?
Well, we have, and it's based biblically first and foremost in Jesus' call for all times, for all Christians everywhere, to make disciples. So we don't get a hall pass on this one. Every generation of Christians always has the same mandate from our Lord to make disciples. Titus 2 explains to us that there's a way, almost a prescriptive methodology that Paul gives to a young pastor on how to grow his church. Not just numerically, but in spiritual depth, for older men to pass on to young men, older women to pass on to younger women. So the good news for us is there's no wheels to invent here. There's biblical precedent that helps inform these processes. Now, you're right. There is a significant number, really a growing number of baby boomers who, as they're moving into that grandparenting season, what we're seeing is not only sociologically in the culture, but unfortunately, but in reality in the church as well, for a number of different factors that we got whole shows that we spend on this, but for voluminous factors, the generation of millennials, by and large, are less churched and less frequent in their church attendance. Right. Now, are they less spiritual? I say no. I think they are as spiritual. I think the spiritual need is the same. The need for the gospel is the same, but how they manifest their spiritual engagement, particularly in the local church, is significantly diminished. That's true in Southern Baptist life, in my denomination, but it's even more true and exacerbated in just about every evangelical denomination and our Catholic friends as well. So taken together, it's a real thing. So we've been working to have conversations and to mobilize grandparents, baby boomer, parents and grandparents, to say, this should be my retirement season. This should be my sort of spiritual Social Security season where I make the withdrawals that I've deposited all these years. But we're asking in our church, and many like ours, is no, this isn't a timeout. This is we need you on the field more than ever. We need you discipling. We need you mentoring. I spoke to a mom this morning at our church, Kirby, who a grandparent in our church. She's lending influence to a young mom at a Bible study this morning who needs encouragement. She's got a son far from the Lord. It's a quintessential case of what you're talking about. And we see more of that. And I think one of the ways we directly attack it is when we mobilize older men and women of the faith, not exclude them, not segment them, but mobilize them. The myth is that young people don't want to hear from old people. That's mythology. We know the Scripture tells us that's not the case. So we know that's not the will of God. So the Holy Spirit's with us in this endeavor. But I don't think that's an issue that young people don't want to hear from older people. It's that a lot of older people aren't sure what to say.
Right.
They don't know how to say it. They don't know the venue to say it. And so we're working in a number of different creative ways to create engagement. And in the event that maybe there's a millennial son or daughter that says, I'm backing away from the faith or I'm out, but they're having kids now, and the average millennial woman's having her baby around 30, and she's getting married around 29. That's a significant jump from even just the 1950s and 60s. That's 6 to 7 sociological years. That's a big, big, big deal. And so as families and marriages are starting later, maturity gaps have widened, not closed, because I learned as a young guy in his 20s, marriage will shape in you pretty quickly. Yeah. It'll encourage you. But we don't have that number of our millennials. And so having grandparents and baby boomers that are highly engaged, highly involved, both with their kids but their grandkids as well, it's a huge difference maker.
Well, let's come to a grandparent. And first of all, tell me how many grandchildren you do have.
Number 22 just born in Kazakhstan with my missionary son. And
that's wonderful.
And some of the best advice I ever got as a young dad, I was at a Bible conference, and the speaker said, remember now, you're not raising children, you're raising your grandchildren.
There you go.
Yeah, so he was already teaching me to look ahead and anticipate, even though I have a 5-year-old, someday that 5-year-old's going to grow up and he's going to start having kids.
That's right.
Where do I fit? And so I totally agree with you. The grandparents, my friends who are listening right now, please, please understand it is so important to pour your life into those grandkids, because that's the way God made it happen.
That's right.
I think.
That's right.
I was just thinking, let's hear from some of the grandparents right now, because we encourage you to call the pledge line. You can actually, when you do make that phone call, say that you're a grandparent, and maybe even some people would want to pray with you because you've had a prodigal son or daughter. Matter of fact, we got Michael Perrin here tomorrow. He's been speaking about that as well. But this is an opportunity for us, first of all, to challenge any of the listeners out there that maybe are millennials or Gen Z or whatever it might be, but also to recognize that the parents and grandparents who may be concerned about the future of this country. One of the things I've heard was I've traveled around. You know, this year we've been to Alaska, we've been to South Carolina, we've been to Georgia, we've been to Alabama, we've been to Mississippi. Next week I'm in California. Almost to a person, they're concerned about the future of this country.
Yep. Should
but
be.
sometimes they're concerned about that because they're concerned about their own kids and grandkids.
Right. That's right. You know, and so we're inviting you. This is probably the best opportunity or reason to call and support Point of View, because we are here for grandparents and parents with programming. So let me just give that information. You can get to us at pointofview.net. Pointofview.net. You can see the thank you gifts we have right there on the website. You can also make your pledge of support. We're suggesting a monthly gift of $50 or more. Maybe there's a few out there that could do $100 a month or more. 800-347-5151. 800-347-5151 or pointofview.net.
Going to take a break, and when we come back, Jonathan's going to talk a little bit about this ministry to married adults. You know, what's that like, and what are some of the issues they are addressing, because that's another topic. But especially want to hear from you right now. If you've appreciated the Millennial Roundtable, that's why we're featuring that. That's why we have Dr. Jonathan Teague in studio with us. And if you think it's a good idea, and if you appreciate some of the insight, we definitely want to hear from you this hour. And for those of you that are parents and grandparents, we want to include you as well.
Yeah.
The website is pointofview.net. You can find many of the articles we've posted there today. You can find out about the various thank you gifts there, and that should be enough. But we also have a lot of people just sitting around a phone right now, and they're waiting for you to call at 800-347-5151. That is 800-347-5151. We'll continue right after this.
If you want to achieve more stability in your life, here's a tip. You can't. We learned that the hard way the last 18 months. Stability is something we try to build for ourselves through our jobs, our routines, our relationships, even our health. But no matter how stable we think our lives are, all of it can change in a moment. No wonder Americans' anxiety is through the roof. Many have lost the only sense of stability they ever had. In the midst of all the recent change and disruption, Isaiah 40 verse 8 offers a refreshing reminder. The grass withers, the flower fades, but the word of our God will stand forever. That's why Point of View will always point you to God's unchanging Word no matter what goes on in the world. When you join our truth team today, you will aid that mission and help more Americans be spiritually prepared for whatever changes come next. To begin making this ongoing impact, visit pointofview.net or call 1-800-347-5151. That's pointofview.net and 800-347-5151. Point of View will continue after this.
You are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again, is Kirby Anderson.
Back once again, as we mentioned, we are listener supported and certainly do encourage your participation. But one of the things that we have talked about on this program before is how biblical truth sometimes is overwhelmed by all the world's truth. And I put truth in a capital T with all sorts of exclamation marks and quotes, because it isn't really Lord's truth, but it is a good example of even what we found with the younger generation, that they are taken captive by false philosophies and theologies and things like that. You see that in Colossians 2:8, or they've become conformed to this world, which is Romans 12:1 and 2. So that's one of the reasons we wanted to do something that would actually highlight the fact that we do a millennial roundtable. And in studio with us today, Dr. Jonathan Teague, as well as, of course, Brad. And Jonathan, that is a big issue as well, because if I spend, as a millennial or Generation Z, 10 hours a day looking at a screen, it could be a computer screen, it could be a video screen, it could be the screens on my phone. The end of a week, that's 70 hours of video input. And I've got to counteract that with a 45-minute sermon in a church. Who wins? And that's one of the big challenges we face right now, isn't it?
So it is, and I think this is a great opportunity, Kirby, to just kind of compliment and affirm what you're doing and what Point of View is accomplishing. Because when we think about the layers of engagement that young people are encountering, so that you've created what some would call a frustrating dichotomy, right? So there's an overwhelming amount of digital consumption going on, and then we just had a baby this summer. I've got 5 kids now. They range from almost age 16 down to 2 months. So I'm in it for a while now.
I would say so.
We're making our generational imprint, right? So I've got arguably not only just 5 different learning styles and genders, of course, boys and girls represented, but then also personalities. And then now the newest struggle for millennial parents that's paramount really is the digital competition. So what we're finding out is that creating layered engagements, right? Our student ministry excels at this, and others that I know in the space, where they spend time finding creative ways to engage and connect and inform. What I love about what Point of View is doing, particularly when we highlight through the millennial discussion, but just as you zoom out and the breadth of what you're doing, because you bring so much depth of knowledge. I always, whenever I listen to you, I always learn something. Mm-hmm. I've told you this before. And I'm always amazed at the volume of material that you've taken time and your team have taken time to develop and cultivate. But not only that, it's clear. So, having gone through various levels of academia, you engage a lot of content out there. Some of it makes sense. I'm doing some teaching now at the doctoral space, and I'm finding out some of it's not as easy to understand, right? Mm-hmm. But your content is always so clear. It's helpful. But it's also accessible. And so one of the things that you've done that I think is so helpful in intersecting where people are, younger people in particular, is the places where content's being made available. And so it's not just in one place, it's in multiple places. And the fact that you have a daily presence here and that you're willing to kind of press in to what is an ever-growing cultural darkness and shine some pretty bright lights with the gospel and helping people get informed. And frankly, for grandparents out there, for moms and dads that want to cultivate their kids and their families that Brad was talking about, there's a bank of resources here. And I just encourage your listeners to stop, spend a few extra minutes on pointofview.net and other places where you're present online and dig into what's available out there, because I think you'll find a lot of enrichment in the things that you care most about, your family, your grandkids, and making a really lasting impact there generationally.
Brad, sometimes people say, well, what am I supporting? A radio program? Yes. Am I supporting video? Yes. Are you supporting all the printed material? Yes. Am I supporting the magazines, the booklets, the videos, all those kinds of things? Yep. And so in some respects, that is a very significant aspect of what we do here in the ministry. Let's talk about what you're doing right now, ministering to married adults. First of all, at Prestonwood, 2 campuses, an enormous number of individuals, but again, it just comes back to basics. Some of the issues that we need to pass on to parents and parenting schedules and parenting styles and things of that nature.
Well, you bet. Yeah. And so I'm privileged to be a part of a very large team and one piece of many very gifted and talented leaders. Dr. Graham, our pastor, all the way down to all of our campuses, our Spanish-speaking ministries.
Yes.
I was with that team last week at Southwestern Seminary, and we're exploring some new partnerships in our intern program, which I've been privileged to give leadership to this year. And so we're trying to find ways, Kirby, to put an expanding gospel footprint in lots of different spaces: parenting, marriage enrichment, marriage preparation,
yes,
ongoing marital just encouragement and building, adoption ministry. Of course, our pregnancy center has always been a front and center endeavor, a Jesus ministry, as our pastor likes to say in the city. But we're pressing into all of those things because we're finding out that folks have a lot of questions, a lot of needs. And I would say this is no shocker. Much has been said about this already, but during and post-COVID, we're finding out that folks had a significant amount of need that more or less went, we were kind of alluding to this on the break, Brad, more or less went unnoticed because there's quite a bit of entertainment out there, quite a bit of boredom out there.
Mm-hmm.
We could sort of satiate ourselves with the online world. Then COVID hits and everything sort of stops. The people-to-people stops. So we've found out that the in-person ministry of the local church is indispensable if you want to see the gospel go out in the city. So our team, our discipleship team, spiritual development team, we're going all in so many different areas, a myriad of areas, to try to make an impact and meet people where they are and help them grow in their faith and meet Jesus.
And that's kind of a setup for what we'll be talking about tomorrow. You know Michael Perrin. He'll
Yes.
be sitting in that
Yeah.
chair. And matter of fact, we've got an outlook coming out in the future on suicide. We have booklets on loneliness. We've talked about anxiety and so many other things, depression. These are kinds of topics that we felt needed to be addressed as well. And you have done that even in your own church, haven't you?
Well, we have, and Michael and his life recovery ministry that he leads is one example of many where as pastors on our staff, the phone rings, the emails come in constantly with people with questions, trying to navigate how do I understand and contextualize this particular problem for my kid, my grandkid, myself, my marriage, and then what is the biblical answer for it? And again, I'll come back to what you're doing in your ministry and point of view. There are answers out there. In fact, there's robust material here in this ministry that folks ought to know about and ought to take advantage of, both what you talk about every day, but also what's available in all the other ways that you've mentioned as well.
So, Brad, that's one of the reasons we wanted to bring Jonathan in here, just to focus again on some of the things having to do with the millennial generation. But also, I'm hoping to hear from pastors and grandparents and parents and millennials and anybody else listening to.
Pretty much, if you're a person,
yes.
I'd like to hear from you.
I think
we'll just kind of let them wrap that all up in a package.
Right. Click any one of those boxes.
That's
Maybe
right.
you can click more than one of those boxes.
But you said something that I think is passed over too often, and that is you're not just supporting a radio program. You are, but not just radio. There's all these other resources in print, online, social media. You even go out and do trips and do face-to-face. I mean, all of that wrapped together, that is what your dollars are supporting as you give to the Truth Team, to Point of View at 800-347-5151, 800-347-5151. That's the number to call and step up and say, I want to stand with you.
And again, as I've said before, Jonathan is a busy individual, so for him to give us a half an hour here, it's not like he's just saying, well, I got nothing better to do, so I'll come on Point of View.
It's a pleasure.
And it is a pleasure. But what would you say to our listeners that maybe are saying, I've never really supported this ministry before, and you have been around us enough now, being in this studio many times for different broadcasts. What would you say to some of those individuals?
I would say join in on what's happening. I would say lend some time and lean into what's available here in this ministry. I would say join the conversation as well. That's one of the things we're finding out with young adults in particular. You know, they want to be seen, heard, and known. And one of the things I appreciate about this program and your ministry, Kirby, is that you are standing up and stepping into those spaces where in the culture, frankly, a lot of the answers that are available to young adults is just more questions.
Yeah.
And so we've made an art out of just a perpetual ongoing cynicism of why.
Yeah.
Jean Twenge talks about this in her material, where there's just a significant amount of consternation with young people of, well, why is this right? And why did the church do this way? And what about these things? And there's, what's great, the great news is in the Gospels, Jesus is never afraid of a why question.
That's right.
He answers them all the time. And so in so many ways, what you're doing is an extension of the ministry that Jesus starts in his earthly ministry. And we're making space to answer those wise questions through a biblical lens. And so I would just encourage you, particularly if you're a young adult out there, you're not alone in this journey. God knows who you are. He loves you. He knows your name, and he has a story to write. And it begins with you trusting Jesus and learning what it means to follow Jesus in this world. And so I think leveraging the materials of your ministry would just be so helpful, along with connecting with a local church, which I know you're a huge advocate of. But this is such a wonderful compliment for any young Christian in particular that wants to develop their worldview and grow in their faith.
As you well know, Brad, I travel around, and one of the things I do hear often is I was pretty much given up on the younger generation. Then I spent been listening to Chelsea and Jonathan and some of them, and I have hope for the future. And if nothing else, you've had a chance to meet Jonathan for the first time today here, but I've really been encouraged by some of the things we've heard.
Yeah, we are a team. We're in this together. And there's a lot coming. I don't know. It's not all going to be good, I'm afraid, but that's okay because it's God's will. And I don't know what that is, but I do know this. We need your help right now financially. 800-347-5151. That's toll free, 800-347-5151. 5151. And they can also go to the website
at pointofview.net. And I would hope you would go to pointofview.net or give us a call, 800-347-5151. Jonathan, back at you. I learn every time I hear you on the program as well, and look forward to the next time you'll be on with us.
Well, thank you, Kirby. Thanks for all you do. Love this ministry.
Again, you give us a call, 800-347-5151. We'll see if we can bring Warren Kelly in to get an update on how we're doing. All that right after this.
Point of View Truth Team, unchanging truth in a changing world.
The things that catch my attention are the abortion issue, and it's so important for people to understand the value of life. And to me, that is number one in our lives. And the shows that I've heard on that have impacted. It just gives me kind of a different venue to be able to explain things differently to people. And I have kept in touch with the ministry, and I do donate each month because I feel like it's an important way for people to understand the worldview and that Christ taught. And we have just tried very hard to instill that in our children. Thank you so much for your service, guys, because you do have one.
Back once again, let me just encourage you, if you would like to support us as a ministry, you can give us a call, 800-347-5151. Brought some individuals in here, but let me just give you one more piece of information that came out just the other day. You know, we're talking about trying to pass a $3.5 trillion budget bill. And Betsy McCoy, who used to be the Lieutenant Governor of the state of New York, has been on the program with us before, says, you know, what is happening there is people have started digging in. And you heard Gary Bauer talking about how long these bills are. And all of a sudden they said, wait a minute, there are all sorts of provisions that would tax people that are non-union workers more than union workers. Now, about 90% of the U.S. workforce are non-union, but this shows up in various benefits that are given to individuals. There are tax credits given in certain ways. And it's so interesting. Even providing an opportunity for a tax credit for people that buy electric vehicles, but there's an additional $4,500 sweetener added if it's a union-made vehicle, which has caused even Toyota to say, this is pitting one American auto worker over another. So just a good example of why we need people like Gary Bauer out there, or Eyes and Ears, or Betsy McCoy, or others saying, you won't believe what's in these pieces of legislation, and you won't hear it anywhere else except right here at Point of View. One of the reasons why we encourage you to consider what you might do to support this ministry. Again, the number is 800-347-5151 or pointofview.net.
That's right. That's 800-347-5151. And you can go to the website at pointofview.net. Warren Kelly.
Yes.
Welcome.
Thank you.
The president of Point of View. And we asked you to come in the last segment for this hour for a very good reason. We'd like to know how things are going as far as our friends responding, because only 2 times a year do we do this to help raise a good portion of our budget.
Right. We have heard from a number of our listeners over the last hour or so, and we're very grateful for each and every one of you. You have no idea how much it means to us to have you standing with us and the support that you give. We are so grateful for that. And please know that those of you that are giving, your donation, your support is really making a difference for our future.
Okay, I'm going to have a question.
Okay.
So let's say I give you a gift. I'd really like to know what's going to happen because I gave that gift to Point of View.
The gift that you give to Point of View is going to make a difference in somebody's life, more than likely multiple somebody's lives all across the country. You've heard the stories that we have told. I think, Kirby, you've seen It's a Wonderful Life, and it's the idea of what happens if this person didn't happen or hadn't been born. Think of what our nation would look like without a Kelly Shackelford. That the work that he has done in the legal system to fight for our religious liberties and how much he has achieved in protecting our religious liberties. But Kelly is doing what he's doing today because somebody like you invested in Point of View when he was a law school student, and Point of View helped shape his worldview and helped motivate him to go into the work that he's now doing. And I could literally take all day telling you stories like that. Your gift is going to change people's lives, and those people's lives are going to change our nation.
One of the things that I just did this week was talk to an individual that started a pregnancy resource center because of listening to Point of View.
Wow.
And we decided, he's getting old enough now. We might want to put him on videotape here, although I think he's got many years left, but just wanted to have him tell his story. And Warren, you just think of the number of people that we've run into just in this last year who decided to homeschool their kids, or decided to start a Christian school, or decided to either start a pregnancy resource center or fund a pregnancy resource center, or individuals that we have run into that ran for office. Sometimes they're just city council offices, but some have even run for Congress. And of course, we talk about Michelle Bachmann ran for the presidency, and actually served as a member of Congress. We just have story after story after story, and a lot of that is because people in the past gave, but we want people to pay it forward for the future, don't we?
Yes, we do. Your gift is going to be out there touching another Kelly Shackelford, or another, you talked about Lee Weaver doing a crisis pregnancy center, or there are countless people that have gone into Christian broadcasting, have gotten into other forms of ministry, and literally you could go on and on all day. People who have, you heard the testimony a little bit ago of the young lady who said, I don't know how to vote without point of view.
Mm-hmm.
You know, there's people that have contacted their member of Congress that never would have if it was not for point of view. But that's because of people like you that are supporting point of view.
So we need to hear from you, and we really want you to give us a call or to make that pledge by going online. Let me give you an overview of what's going to happen tomorrow. I did already kind of tip my hand a little bit. We have, for the first time, spent a little bit more time talking about some of these mental issues, some of these psychological issues, things like depression, anxiety, addiction, and the rest. And so we thought it'd be good to bring Michael Perrin on, who's been with us. Of course, we just heard from June Hunt a minute ago, who says, just think about what it would be like if point of view didn't exist, and she's been with us. And then Greg Kokel, because he is kind of our expert on apologetics, and we talk about this idea of supporting a ministry. So there are some very good reasons for you to support Point of View.
Point of View Truth Team.
And in the absence of resources like Point of View and the silencing of the church, I think it would in effect create the silencing of the church. And that's why, again, it is so essential that that forums like Point of View and the work that you and Kirby are doing is so vital to the work of the church. And this is where listeners can be an active participant in spreading the gospel of the kingdom by supporting Point of View.
Without programs like Point of View, ministries and works would not have a forum that reaches the populations that need to hear the truth about the very important issues that America is founded on. So often we take what we hear for granted, the radio program or the wonderful personalities, but you know, they can only be on if people like you and me support them.
Clearly, I think that we are operating in a culture that is at every turn seeing the media and Hollywood push an agenda on them, and you folks present the truth. And not only do you present the truth, you present it in a gracious way that helps people to understand the facts.
Point of View Truth Team.
Only a few minutes left. Let me just mention that, first of all, if you go to the website, pointofview.net, you'll see the various premium. Some of you might say, okay, I would like to see what an Outlook magazine looks like. Well, it's there. I'd like to see some of the booklets.
Mm-hmm.
I'd like to see those bags that Brad has been talking about,
those
the
are really
canvas
cool
messenger bag or the leather laptop bag, and those are all available to you at $50 a month.
That's correct. $50 a month or more. And you do that by getting a hold of us. 800-347-5151 is the phone number to get you to a live person to help take care of you. 800-347-5151. You can also, of course, go to pointofview.net and get all the information there about how to make your pledge of support. Pointofview.net. And again, 800-347-5151.
Even though we're going off the air, we'll still take some phone calls. Matter of fact, I find that sometimes the phones ring after we go off the air because they don't want to miss any of the content.
That's okay.
So you can still give us a call, 800-347-5151. Anytime you can go to the website, pointofview.net. Brad and Warren and Andrew and Steve, thank you for your help, and we will look forward to seeing you tomorrow right here on Point of View.
If you want to achieve more stability in your life, here's a tip. You can't. We learned that the hard way the last 18 months. Stability is something we try to build for ourselves through our jobs, our routines, our relationships, even our health. But no matter how stable we think our lives are, all of it can change in a moment. No wonder Americans' anxiety is through the roof. Many have lost the only sense of stability they ever had. In the midst of all the recent change and disruption, Isaiah 40 verse 8 offers a refreshing reminder. The grass withers, the flower fades, but the word of our God will stand forever. That's why Point of View will always point you to God's unchanging word no matter what goes on in the world. When you join our truth team today, you will aid that mission and help more Americans be spiritually prepared for whatever changes come next. To begin making this ongoing impact, visit pointofview.net or call 1-800-347-5151. That's pointofview.net and 800-347-5151. Point of View is produced by Point of View Ministries.